Hi, in this video join me as I bring you 5 tips that I learned in the film world which really make my digital shooting far better. Hi YouTube, Brian James at Micro Four Thirds Guy with you once again on this rather dull and wet evening here in Hadrian's Wall country in Cumbria. You know, as I get older I realise some of the things that I take for granted, being on the slightly older side, are different for the younger generation, different for other people too. You know, it seems incredible to me that I get into a car and I've got 2 children that both drive cars, and if I was to say what the choke is, they would look at me with puzzlement. They wouldn't know what the choke is, let alone what it actually does. Yet to me, when I started driving, a choke was an integral part of how to actually start the engine. I wouldn't have been able to get anywhere without using the choke to richen the fuel up when I first start the engine on a cold day. So things have changed when it comes to technology of cars. When I look at what my father drove when he first started driving, he used to adjust the fuel mixture to actually be able to get the car to drive properly. That was all automated by the time I got there, and I wouldn't have a clue how to set the fuel mixture properly. So things change. Yesterday I was out at a nature reserve and I was taking some photographs, and there was a couple of women there, a similar sort of age to me, maybe a little bit less than me, and one of them had a nice Nikon D500, really good lens, and had been taking photographs of woodpeckers. But when I started talking to them, they saw my photography badge on my polo shirt here. I realised after a few seconds, they asked me for some help, and I naturally try and give it. But I realised that I was losing them. I could see the look on their face that they were either not understanding what I was saying, or it had no real relevance to their photography. And that made me probe a little bit more, and I realised that a lot of what I was talking about, I was bringing from my photography days when I started as film cameras, fully manual cameras which used roll film or which used cartridge film. And I realised that these 2 people had never shot any sort of real film camera in the past. Everything they'd done had been on this new digital camera which was fairly recent to them, and they were doing a really good job. They'd taken some good photographs of woodpeckers, but they wanted to get it a little bit better and didn't understand how. So I kept on making a reference back to the old days, the film days, and I realised that I need to explain a little bit more. And also, when I've looked at some of the comments underneath my videos in the past, it seems quite clear to me that an awful lot of people who view this channel also have never taken photographs on film cameras and maybe don't quite understand the significance of what I'm saying and as to why I'm actually bringing in my experience from that into the modern digital age. So I'm going to try and take you through some of that if I can, and see if I can help give you some tips which will make your digital photography far better because of the experience from film days. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that if you haven't got film experience that you're a bad photographer, and I'm also not saying that if you do have it, it makes you a good photographer. But what it does is it gives you extra tools in your toolkit as to get a far better photograph. If you can incorporate some of those old-fashioned techniques and old-fashioned ways of working into the modern digital age with your digital camera with all its features, then combining the two is going to give you the opportunity to get a far better shot. And it might just be the shot which gives you the difference between making it a real killer shot and just a normal acceptable one. Keep watching until the end and you'll find my #1 tip that I learned from taking film photographs which I now use in the digital age to improve my photography. Oh, and while you're watching, don't forget, hit the subscribe button below, and if you get the chance, give me a big thumbs up to like this video, because that helps YouTube spread it to more and more people so they can see the videos and enjoy the experience of taking photographs. So in at number 5, learn to shoot as if there's no stabilisation on your camera or lens. Yeah, that's right. Now, I'm not saying switch it off. Don't switch it off. It's great. It really does work well. But in the early days when I started on cameras, you didn't have stabilisation in the lens or the camera. And what stabilisation does is it uses little motors to move either the sensor or some of the elements of the lens to take away the natural shaking that we have as humans. Now, if you watch my monopod video that I did a couple of weeks ago, there's a link above. Have a look at that one. I go into why pushing the limit of your stabilisation can actually be a bad thing, and by using old-fashioned techniques can actually keep you well within the limits and expand the range of what you can shoot and get away with. Things such as controlling your breathing, getting your heart rate to slow down, using things such as tripods or monopods, or even a good old wall. I've got some brick walls behind me. I've got part of Hadrian's wall behind. If you can lean against the wall, then that can also give you extra stability. The way that you stand, the way that you place your feet to make you more stable, and the way that you can actually time your shots, they all help. Now, if you've got 6, maybe 7 stops of stabilization, that's great. But in the reality is, you've only got a certain amount that sensor or that lens element can move before it hits a stop. If you're using all of that, if you are so unstable that you're using all that, what happens when you go slightly beyond there? Well, by using good techniques, it keeps it well within the bounds of that. So not only are you getting 6 or 7 stops of image stabilization, but you might find in low light conditions, if you can brace yourself and really make the camera as stable as possible, you may even push it to 8, 9 stops in reality. That's not uncommon, and it's really good, and it comes down to technique. Use it. It's well worth it. Costs you nothing. And better still, it gives you an appreciation of how cameras see movement. In at number 4, select the focal length to give you the right shot, then zoom with your feet. Now, different focal lengths have different properties, and it's not just to do with zoom. A long focal length will have the effect of giving compression, getting things to compress together, but also gives a much more shallow depth of field. A wide angle lens will give you a very wide depth of field, but also what it does is it creates distortions. We've seen these selfies with people have wide angle lenses on the mobile phones, and it distorts the face, while portrait lenses tend to be a middle range lens. Well, these are the very things that you should be looking at. So your focal length is intrinsic to getting a really good shot. Now, also using the wrong focal length can be a problem as well. If you've got something like a really long focal length and you're having to get close up to by the time you get close enough to take a shot, it's gone. So really, the focal length itself is important in many, many ways. Now, in the old film days, most cameras used to come with a fixed prime lens on it, a 50mm or something like that on the old 35mm film cameras, and they were really, really good. But the problem that you had with zoom lenses are a lot more complicated, and they're a lot more difficult to get a really good image across the whole zoom range. So what you quite often found in the days when I started, that a zoom lens would be incredibly expensive and very, very slow in comparison to other lenses of the day. They still tend to be a lot slower than the prime lenses that have the equivalences. But when you're getting some of the zoom lenses which were starting at f8 and going upwards, you were very, very limited on that. Well, today we've got zoom lenses, really good quality zoom lenses which come with the camera. And the thing is that when I look at someone's shot, especially shots from people who are beginning as photographers, who are new to the field, you can see what they've done is they'll pick somewhere to stand, they'll zoom in until they get it framed properly and the composition right, they'll take the shot. But the thing which is usually not working so well is the way that the image is actually portrayed because of the focal length of the film. So what my advice is, work out what focal length you really think is the best to take that shot, then work out how you're going to get to the physical distance away to get that shot right. For instance, if I'm taking portrait shots of somebody, I'm usually using something like around about a 45mm lens on the Olympus, on the Micro Four Thirds cameras, or it used to be about an 85mm if I was using full frame. And that gave me, when I was doing head and shoulders shots, a good 6 feet away. What it also meant is that the facial features weren't distorted to give a very, very natural view. Now, if I was using a wide angle lens, say a 35mm lens on a full frame, or a 17mm lens on my Micro Four Thirds, I'd be almost in someone's face. I'd be so close into their personal zone. Not only that, it would cause the face to distort, it would cause features to be elongated. Similarly, if I was using something really long, if I was using, say, a 200 or a 300mm lens on a full frame, which would be equivalent to half that on a Micro Four Thirds, then I'm too far away. I've lost some of that intimacy. And also, I'm going to get some really good shots portrait-wise out of that, but I just wouldn't have the ability to encourage that person to act at the best. So using the right focal length first and then working out your distance to stand is often the best way to do it. Now, don't forget, if you're enjoying this video, then please give me a like, thumbs up on below, and the subscribe. And also, if you want me to carry on making some of these videos, then consider buying me a cup of coffee. There's a PayPal link below. Really would appreciate it. And thanks to all those ones who have up to now. In at number 3, limit your ISO sensitivity. Now, today we have cameras capable of some amazing ISOs. Now, when I say ISO and ASA, they're basically interchangeable-ish. They're pretty much the same. So 100 ASA is 100 ISO. We used to use ASA in the old film days. We've now gone to ISO in the digital days. But effectively they're the same. So we've now got cameras which are capable of doing 125,000, 256,000 ISO. Incredible sensitivity. But in the old film days, if you were shooting on a 400 or a 1000 ASA film, that was really about as fast as you could get. And they were grainy. But don't be fooled. A 400 ASA film was still very grainy. A 1000 one really was grainy. You know, we're really blessed with some fantastic modern technology to be able to get this sensitivity, but we don't have to use it so far as we do. Now, it always amuses me, and sometimes almost annoys me, when you get people complaining that Micro Four Thirds is unusable because it's 6400 ISO. It's so noisy, it's untrue. Well, to my mind, if it's that noisy, don't go there. You know, to be able to shoot at 6400 ISO anyway is fantastic. Get further than that is unbelievable. But if you know how to use light, if you know how to control the light, and you know how to use some of the techniques, the ones that I said earlier, insofar as how to brace yourself, how to use tripods, how to use monopods, how to use things to assist you to get low light photographs, they're the things which are really going to give you an edge. Now, you're not going to get every shot on this, but what it's going to do, if you can use some of those techniques and you can really limit your ISO down to 100 ASA, to 100 ISO or 200 ISO, but in dark situations which the camera normally would struggle at, if you can use your techniques to add to what the camera can do, you're going to get that killer shot. And you're going to get a killer shot with really good quality. And not only that, it teaches you about how the qualities of light work. So if you can understand about low light situations without having to push the camera into silly high ISOs, you've got an advantage. Now, what that also means, of course, is if you've got something which is really outside those bounds, then you can up the ISO. You can actually start increasing it, but you've given yourself a better starting block. It's almost like being on a 100-metre sprint and somebody putting your starting blocks 25 metres down towards the finishing line. You've already got a 25-metre advantage. Now, when I started using film, it wasn't uncommon to see people using 25 ASA or 64 ASA as a normal film. Now, our cameras won't even go that low in its ISO. So if you can imagine being limited to, say, 64 ISO, what can you do on your camera with that? Well, photographers in the past managed to get some mind-blowing photographs, and it's still the same today. If you want to be able to use mind-blowing photographs with superb quality, you can still do it. You just got to learn how to use some of those techniques and apply them to the technology that you got in your camera, and use the two hand in hand, and you're going to have some killer abilities. Now, the problem is that this technology has caused photographers to not push their boundaries, to not work to their best abilities. So they'll take what the camera gives them and think that that's all they're going to get. But by using some of these techniques, especially when it comes to low light, then what it's doing is it's allowing the photographer to actually expand their capabilities. And that's really, really important, especially for somebody starting this profession or hobby. And if you are doing a shot for money, it could just be the difference between getting paid by your client and missing out on the payment. In at number 4, shoot manual. Shoot everything manual. Don't always shoot manual, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying switch off the auto altogether. I often see these videos online where you get somebody preaching, you should shoot manual all the time, switch off your auto. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that if you learn how to use the camera in a manual mode, if you learn how all the features interact with each other in a manual mode, it means that when you're coming to switch into automatic, instead of letting the camera make the decisions for you, you're making the decisions yourself. And that gives unbridled creativity possibilities. You know, all of my early cameras were fully manual. They had manual shutter speed, they had manual aperture, they had manual focus, and it was manual ISO or ASA because you had to change the film. You had to choose your film in advance before you actually went to take the shots. Imagine that. Imagine turning up somewhere and saying, okay then, you're stuck on this ISO and you think it's unsuitable. Well, that's what you used to have with film. The only way you could change the ISO was to change the film itself physically. And if you're halfway through a roll, you can't take the film out without wasting it. So we've got some amazing things that we can do today. But by shooting on manual, you can learn how all the features of a camera interact. What happens when you open the aperture up or when you close the aperture down? What effect does that have? Not just on the light itself, but on how the photograph works insofar as depth of field. What about shutter speed? If you learn how the shutter speed works, what's the effect on the shutter speed on, say, a moving or a fixed object? Why would you need a fast or a slow shutter speed? How does a fast shutter speed help you if you've got particularly shaky hands or an unstable surface? All these things. And what happens when you use a low or a high ISO on the sensor? What happens to the quality of the photograph itself? All of these are really important, and especially one of the things for me is when you're shooting on manual focus. If you're manually focusing something and learning what things like hyperfocal distances are, where you work out what the midpoint is, and that's where your depth of field is either side of that. Remember, if you looked on some of the lenses, some lenses have it, some didn't, some don't now, but certainly in the older days they used to have some markings on for the distance. When you understand what the focal distance is as well as the focal length, then you can work out what you're doing. Remember, if you've got something like a nature photographer or a sport photographer, they'll use manual focus and they'll understand the depth of field, so what's going to be in focus in front of that centre point and behind that centre point. They'll use that. So if they're focusing on a tree with a telephoto lens, say, and they're waiting for a bird to go into flight, if it's already focused on manual and they know what the focus extremes are, and they know they've got the focus nailed in the first place, when that bird moves or when that vehicle passes by on a racetrack, they know that they're going to be pin sharp straight away. They're not waiting for the camera to catch up, and they're not waiting for it to slew and lose focus. They know they're going to be spot on straight away. So understanding manual focus can be a real bonus. And of course, if you're doing video work, a lot of videographers use manual focus because it overrides some of that hunting that you get in the focus. So when you're shooting in manual, you're learning the interaction between all the parts of the camera, and you're understanding how light works with each of those and how the composition is differed by all the effects on that. It really is important. Now, one of the things that people do say to me is it's so slow though, especially if you're manual focusing. But a lot of that is just down to practice. If you can learn how things work in a manual mode and you can get straight on, you can almost be as fast as the camera. In some cases faster, because you're not worrying about how the camera's having to hunt to find focus. You can focus on, or if it's set in the right aperture, you know it's going to be right for what you want in the first place. And not only that, cameras have a wonderful artificial intelligence system, especially when it comes to things like mobile phones. They're absolutely incredible. They'll give some knockout killer shots, but it's the shot the camera decides that it wants to take, not what you want to take. So if you can learn how to use the manual controls better, you can decide what shot you want. It may be the shot that you have in your head isn't what the camera would decide, and it means that you're never going to get that shot out of that camera if it's purely on auto. But if you can switch it to manual and you can make the controls and you can make the lens and you can make the light work in the way for you, you'll get that creative shot that you want, which the camera would never have done. Okay, we've reached it, my number one carryover from my film days to my digital days. Straightforward. Limit the number of shots that you take to what you would have had on film. Now that sounds a bit silly, but if you think about it, when I first started taking photographs, I used either roll film or cartridge film, depending on which camera I had. So I could be shooting anything from 8 shots to 36 shots in a roll of film. And that's all I had. And a roll of film was expensive. And worse than that, when you've taken a roll of film, you have to take it out, and then you have to send it away to be processed or process it yourself. But that's expensive, either getting somebody else to do it or paying for chemicals to do it, and all the time and effort. It was an expensive process, expensive hobby, and an expensive profession. And if you waste photographs when you're doing it as a professional, it's costing you money that you're not making back from your clients. It's hitting your margins. So we can all do the spray and pray. We've got cameras now which will do 20, 40 shots a second in how you take them. And it could be a spray and pray and you've got a good chance of getting the one in the middle just right. But in reality, you're not getting any satisfaction from it. I know when I started taking photographs, part of the satisfaction for me was to see how many photographs would come out looking good out of a roll. If I had 36 exposures, I used to want 36 of them to be usable shots. There was nothing worse for me than seeing a shot which was out of focus, or a shot which was blurry, or a shot which was badly exposed and I had to start throwing it away. That was a wasted shot for me. So when it comes to modern cameras, I still have that ethos. Even if I'm using a high-speed mode and taking 40 shots a second, I still want those 40 shots to be good ones. Now again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't use the technology. If you're a sports photographer, nature photographer, you really want to be pinning it in so you get a killer shot. And when you've got a fast moving subject, you really need to be bracketing either side because it's going to be far, far faster than you probably are. So you want to be able to get those shots in. But you'll also find that professional photographers or really enthusiastic amateur photographers, they don't waste shots. It's no good taking 1,000 shots or something so you get it 5 minutes before the bird takes off and 5 minutes after it's left the place. They're wasted. If you're taking photographs at an air show, for instance, and the first time you press the shutters when the aircraft is just a pinprick on the shot 2 miles away, you've wasted your time. You want the bit where it's coming in to be usable so that when it's in the middle, effectively, you've got your killer shot and you don't take any more than that. Why? Well, it's just common sense, really. Not only are you making it easier for your storage, you're taking less out of battery, your battery life's longer, you've got more storage capability, and I know that you can change batteries and I know that you can have high storage capacity cards, you can almost shoot until the cows come home. But it's still a limitation. And it's even more limiting when you get it back to the edit side. I hate editing photographs. It's one of the things I really detest doing. I enjoy editing the shot. When I've got the shot in front of me, I enjoy getting the most out of it. But to be perfectly honest, ploughing through 100 shots to find one which is usable isn't my idea of fun. Not only that, it costs for storage space and it costs a lot of time and effort to go through those to find the one that I really want. It's not uncommon for a landscape photographer to go out and trek several tens of miles to reach a point that they want to take a photograph of. And then when set up, they spend a long time getting just the right composition there, waiting for that just right moment of light, and then maybe taking just one photograph, just one, and then checking all those miles back again. But what they're doing is they're making sure that they take the right photograph to do what they want to do. So treat it as if you've only got 24 exposures in your camera or 36 exposures. You don't have to stick to that, but what it means that you're not going mad and just pressing the button for no good reason. You're learning how to use your photography to its best advantage. So that's my top 5 tips as to what I brought from the film world into my digital photography. Now, as I say, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't use the digital photography techniques and the facilities that you've got in your camera at all. Use them, but also use them in addition to what I've just said there. Putting the two together is going to take you from being an adequate digital photographer to a really good one, because what you're doing is you're bringing in all the bits and pieces which make a good photographer, along with the technology which is on the camera, and you're assisting that technology to go that stage further. It could be the difference between an acceptable shot and a killer shot. If you've enjoyed this video, as I say, my name is Brian, James at Micro-Four-Thirds Guy, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button, give me a big thumbs up to like it, and as I say, if you do want to give a donation on PayPal below, buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. Until the next time, take your camera out, take your photographs and enjoy your photography. Bye bye.